Jagdpanther is probably the most impressive German tank destroyer design of the Second World War because it has that great combination of firepower with the Pak 43 88mm gun and the proven Panther tank chassis, which is reliable and also very well defended, the best tank destroyer of the German army of the Second World War. So this is an Sd Kfz 173 Jagdpanther tank, which means hunting panther in the literal translation. It was named by Hitler himself. It's based on the Panther chassis and is a tank destroyer, not a tank because it hasn't got a turret. The idea for the tank destroyer principally comes about in the German army because they are much easier to manufacture and cheaper to manufacture than turreted vehicles, much less moving parts. The Germans, by the late stage in the war when these are deployed, are on the strategic and tactical defensive. So there's no real need for a tank to be able to fire in all directions at the same time because they're waiting for the Allies to come onto them. So instead of producing more and more turreted tanks as the war goes on, instead make more and more of these tank destroyers, these Panzerjäger as they're called. And Hitler comes up with the idea of placing a heavy 88mm gun on a Panther tank chassis, another really good, really well designed tank. And because it uses this proven design as the basis of everything else that's built up on top of it, it becomes a very reliable gun platform, the best tank destroyer of the German army of the Second World War.
And there, silhouetted, coming down the road behind us, was just about the largest tank I'd ever seen. Turned out to be a German Jagdpanther, the muzzle of the 88mm which these Jagdpanthers carry. And that muzzle seemed to come on and on across the ride forever and ever.
Initially, there are supposed to be 150 of these produced every month, but fortunately for the Allies, by the end of the war, only about 400 have been actually built. And that's primarily because of the strategic bombing campaign against the German factories, which cuts back their war production, cuts back German war production to about, in this case, to less than a quarter of the number of vehicles that were supposed to be manufactured. The Jagdpanther was armed with an 88mm Pak 43 gun, which is a development of the very, very famous German 88 of the Second World War, with an even higher muzzle velocity than the earlier versions which are used on the Tiger tank. This was also used on the King Tiger, the huge battle tank used right towards the end of the war. So this was in effect the best German tank killer gun they had.
Our second in command was called Sd Kfz, and he came full on one of these Jagdpanthers, which you remember had the very latest 88 in them, and his tank was hit. Tank split and the turret blew off the tank, and his crew were completely, and he were completely incinerated.
A significant advantage that the Jagdpanther has got is the degree of slope on the front of the vehicle if the enemy's coming at you straight on, which is 30 degrees. This means that a lot of incoming enemy shells will simply ricochet off and won't even attempt to penetrate the armour. The Jagdpanther's frontal armour is 80mm thick, rising to 100mm around the gun mantlet, which is very, very thick for armour of this type of the war. And on the sides, it's still 5cm thick, which is still pretty damn good. The first time the Allies come across this is at the end of the Normandy campaign, just as the Allies are breaking out into the interior of France. And there's only a very, very small number sent over, about 12 to 16, sent over to face the literally thousands of Allied Sherman tanks that are coming in the opposite direction. But even though it appeared in very, very small numbers, there was an immediate impression on the British Armed Forces. This was another vehicle like the Panther, like the Tiger. It was another vehicle that the Allies couldn't really deal with because it was too good.
I mean, there was 11 of us went over the hill, and there it was picking us off. We had no answer to them. We couldn't see where they was coming from. Oh, it was a marvellous tank. A very sloping, glassy front, and then the gun was fixed and it could only go 15 degrees. So if we'd known, they couldn't have picked all 11 of us off. Anyway, there was about 7 of our chaps killed in that action and a few wounded.
The Allies had only one tank, called the Sherman Firefly, that stood any chance of knocking one of these out in a face-to-face encounter. But the Sherman Firefly, although it had a gun that could penetrate the frontal armour of the Jagdpanther. Its frontal armour was paper thin by comparison with the Jagdpanther, and if it was a one-to-one duel and both of them could see each other, the Jagdpanther would usually win. This vehicle so impressed the Allies that at the end of the Second World War, when the production lines were captured, they continued manufacturing them for a little while under British Armed Forces supervision and made 10 more so the British Army could test them, evaluate them and see what lessons they could learn from them in their attempts to design better tanks for the post-war period.
Here too, tanks captured from the enemy in wartime give up their secrets in the finest equipped testing bays in Europe. All this experimental work is vital for our tank supremacy.
The vehicle here, it was tested by the Department of Tank Design in the immediate post-war period and got knocked about in that process. But they did take photographs of it, so this has been repainted, but from those original photographs. So it's got a copy of the exact original paint scheme on it, and even the number 01 on the side is the number it was carrying the day it was knocked out. The camouflage pattern coloration on the German vehicles, this is standard for German vehicles of this period of the war, 1944. They've moved away from the German grey that everybody tends to think of when you're thinking of German armour, and they've moved to what's this is called a Dunkelgelb camouflage scheme. Dunkelgelb just meaning dirty yellow. It's a standard sort of 5-man crew. Most large battle tanks, Allied and Axis at this period of the war, have 5-man crews. So the wireless operator is also the loader in this case. So you've got wireless operator, loader, gunner, commander, driver, gun layer. And they all sit inside that. That looks quite a roomy vehicle in terms of its interior capacity, but I can assure you that when you're inside it, you are almost literally cheek by jowl with the other members of the crew. So if, for instance, you're the driver, the commander sits behind and above you, his feet are on your shoulders. But obviously, as you can see, there's very limited vision as well out the front. You've got one slit on the front, the left-hand side in front of the gun, and there's nothing on the sides. So the only real way that you can get some surety of what's going on around you is by the commander of the vehicle sticking his head and shoulders out of the top, which obviously makes him a target for snipers or gunfire or shellfire. Because it's got no turret, it's got a very limited traverse, its gun can only turn 12 degrees on each side. So if it's attacked from the side or the rear, it's at a very distinct disadvantage because it can't fight back, which is actually what happened to this particular vehicle when it was destroyed. So this particular vehicle has got something of a contested history. It's claimed that it was knocked out at the beginning of September 1944 by captain of the Welsh Guards, Captain Griffiths, who became later a peer of the realm, became Lord Griffiths. He supposedly outmanoeuvred it and put 3 rounds into the interior of the tank and 1 round into the fuel tank, which knocked the vehicle out.
We all knew that the 75mm gun we carried was quite incapable of piercing the front. And if you were going to disable it, you had either got to get it in the side or around the back where the armour was thinner. But fortunately, he hit it right on the side at the rear in the engine. And the tank stopped immediately, and the crew started to scramble out, and we then pumped 3 shots into the side of the turret of the tank.
There are other claimants to the kill, if you want to call it that. One of them coming from a German survivor of a Jagdpanther company, an ad hoc battle group called Panzer Group Lex, which lost its Jagdpanther in early April 1945 in Germany. And that was also coincidentally knocked out by a very small grouping of 3 rounds in the side of the vehicle, which also fits the evidence. So we have 2 sort of contestants for who knocked out the Jagdpanther. The main reason why we can't tell exactly when this vehicle was destroyed, and even its exact production date, is the fact that a large piece of armour plate was taken off the side of the vehicle when it was brought back to the United Kingdom for the School of Tank Technology. They didn't note down where it was knocked out, who captured it, or even how it got back to the United Kingdom. All they were interested in was testing it to see how good it was. And as part of that testing process, they took a large piece of armour plate out of the side. It happens to be the bit with the stamp on the plate which tells you the date of manufacture. So we don't know exactly which production number this vehicle is. The hunting tank destroyer idea that was developed by the Germans in the Second World War, which really came out of a necessity in that they couldn't continue manufacturing the numbers of turreted tanks that they otherwise would have done, really dies out in the post-war period because of advances in armour penetration and especially in range finding and the ability to hit on the move. Tanks become much more back into vogue because you can fire and you can hit from any angle at any speed. The Jagdpanther is sort of the last of the tanks firing and fighting on a static battlefield. Sort of the pinnacle, at the apex of the tank destroyer design. Thanks for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe us on the IWM YouTube channel.